Hi guys and welcome back to the Mighty Blues. My name is of course Cameron and welcome back today to another video. It is Friday. I hope you all are doing well. Hope you all have had a fantastic weekend and are looking forward to the weekend ahead. Everton's first pre-season game takes place in a couple of hours or so. The new season is not technically, but sort of officially upon us with Everton's first pre-season game. It'll be a good opportunity to have a look at the squad, good opportunity to have a look at some young players as well, and just to see Everton back in action, which, although we moan about them, and although, you know, when it gets to April and May, we're all talking about how much we can't wait to get away from them, there is, I think, a feeling of quite looking forward to seeing Everton play again. Certainly from my point of view anyway, this is a love-hate relationship for me with this football club, more so love, and you know, even though towards the end of the season I get to a point where I can't wait to see the season finished and I can't wait to have a break, I do usually get to this point in mid-July where I'm like, when's the first pre-season game, when can I actually see the squad? So that'll be good to get a watch on everything that has been happening over pre-season so far and have a little look at the squad. We're going to talk about some more transfer rumours in today's video, rumours that Everton have bid for two attacking players over the last couple of days, which we are going to get into, as well as talking about what for me was an extremely emotional, extremely powerful and extremely important interview that Dele gave with Gary Neville yesterday. I believe it was released. I'm sure you will have all seen it. I actually wanted to do a video on this yesterday when I just watched it, and you know, the thoughts and the feelings surrounding it were very raw at that time. However, yesterday was just an absolutely manic day for me with work and a couple of other bits that were going on, so I wasn't able to do it. So I thought we'd sit down and we'd just discuss it today whilst we're talking about, you know, the other bits and bobs, because I do think it's important what Dele has done, and I think it's important to discuss it and to champion sitting down and talking about how you are feeling, because it is the hardest thing to do, but it is also the most important thing to do, and Dele has sat down and he's informed us of everything that has been going on and given us some context as to why his career maybe has gone the way it has over the last couple of years, and I think it's very important that that is continued now, and that gives the strength to other footballers and other people in general that are struggling, that feel like they can't come out and talk for whatever reason, to come out and talk. It's massively important. But before we get into any of that, if you haven't already checked out Vintage Football Shirts, please do go and have a look in the description. It's the first link in the description. If you click on that, you will go to the Everton page. Vintage Football Shirts is a great website for finding classic and retro shirts for your desired football club. It isn't only Everton that they sell every Premier League clubs throughout Europe. If you're wanting to maybe buy some classic, I don't know, Real Madrid or AC Milan gear, etc, but this is the Everton page, of course, selling shirts from the 90s, the 80s, shorts there as well, training gear, of course, a little bit pricey for the older stuff, but as you move into the early 2000s, which is certainly my era of Everton and the era that I remember for Everton Football Club, that's when you start to get into a little bit more affordable prices, or, you know, if you've got the money to go and spend on a classic shirt, then why not? You can even go to some of the more recent seasons as well. Of course, some of the early Ronald Koeman days, if you're looking to get any of the gear, even if you just fancy, you know, buying a shirt that was out a couple of years ago that you didn't get the chance to buy at the time, they've got pretty much all of them there. So go and check them out in the description down below, Vintage Football Shirts, and a big thanks to them for partnering up with us. But anyway, let's get straight into the video, and I feel like the only real point to start on is that Dele interview, and it really puts into perspective life in general, and certainly life as a professional footballer, because we can often as fans fall into being, you know, guilty of treating this sort of passion and desire and you know, feeling of emotion that we have towards our football club as, you know, maybe subconsciously a little bit like a game sometimes, and we definitely know it's not a game because of all of the emotion and the feeling within it, and I don't think you can sit here and you know, tell any Evertonian that what we've been through over the last 2 years is just part of the game, and it wasn't emotional and it wasn't hurtful, because of course it was. But I do feel like there is an element of football, and certainly from a fan's point of view, in the view of footballers themselves, that look at these people almost in a robotic sense of that, they play for our football club, we support our football club, and therefore, they effectively are there to be a footballer, and rather than actually understanding that these people are human beings as well, and these people often have gone through some very, very difficult times, regardless of how much money is in their bank account, and regardless of how many followers they have on Twitter or Instagram, they still are human beings that have often gone through difficulties in their life, some difficulties that, other people have gone through that haven't got the benefit of having millions of pounds in their banks, and some people that, some difficulties that people haven't gone through either. And Dele gives a really, really good perspective of sort of that sort of notion of that footballers aren't just robotic figures that turn up every week, play football, and that are emotionless, and that, that don't take any notice of criticism and don't take any notice of the things that are said to them on social media or the things that are posted in the papers. They're not. These people are human beings, and regardless of what their financial situation is, and regardless of their level of fame, they're still human beings with feelings. And a lot of these footballers these days are young human beings who have been thrusted into a life of flashy cars and lots of money, and lots of people around you taking pictures and wanting to be your friend and wanting to be close to you before they've even gotten to the ages of 17, 18 years old, before they've even matured as a human being, before they even know what it means to be a decent human on this planet. They've all of a sudden got everything in their hands to deal with. And again, that is part of a deeper societal issue about football in this country, and certainly how football is treated in this country. And I remember back in my day, I used to have mates that were playing for Liverpool, I used to have mates that were playing for Everton, I used to have mates that were playing in academies up and down the country, but they'd still turn up on a Sunday to play for our Sunday League team, or they'd still turn up, even if I had a mate in school who had sales for pretty much every club in the Northwest, and still turned up on the Sunday to have a kickabout with us in the Sunday League game. That simply doesn't happen anymore. If you are somebody who is attracting attention of a professional football club, Premier League or not Premier League, then you often aren't allowed to play on a weekend with your friends. You often aren't allowed to go to the park with your friends after school and kick a ball around, or you're not allowed to run around outside because you might get injured, and then that might ultimately have an effect on what your potential football career is. And these things aren't happening to 18, 19, 20-year-old adults. These things are happening to 6, 7, 8-year-old children. When you are 6, 7, 8 years old, whilst you're passion and whilst your dream might be to become a professional footballer, a massive part of your life is being able to go and have those experiences with your friends. I'm not a professional footballer. I'm not anywhere near the level that these professional footballers are at, but I can't imagine how different my childhood would have been if I was told from a young age, 6, 7, oh no, you can't go out and play football in the street with all of your friends that are playing football in the street because you might risk an injury, or you can't go and do this because this might happen and that might affect your life in 15, 20 years time. It would have been absolutely soul destroying, and I'm sure it is for a lot of these young kids, that now the moment that they are thrusted into an academy or that they're being watched by a football club, all of a sudden a massive part of their life changes at such a young age when it doesn't need to. It simply does not need to, because you don't know whether somebody's going to be a professional footballer at 8, 9 years old. So that pressure shouldn't be put on them. And Dele talks, a lot about the pressures of being a footballer, and certainly, being able to deal with that pressure because of what happened in his earlier years of his life. And listen, you've all seen the interviews, the interview, you've all watched it, you've all heard what he had to say, and for me, it's absolutely heartbreaking. I mean, I'm not going to go into details, the minute details of what was said, but for him to go through what he went through at 6 years old, he was abused. At 7 years old, he was smoking. At 8 years old, he was dealing drugs. At 10 years old, 11 years old, he was hung off a bridge, probably thinking to himself, am I going to survive, or am I not going to survive? He was sent to Africa to learn discipline, and this is all before the ages of 11 years old. This is all before the age of starting secondary school. Now, don't get me wrong, I remember being in primary school, and I remember some of the lessons or some of the friends I had or some of the days that we had in primary school, but it's only very faint memories. And my point is that for all of that to happen in the first 10 years of somebody's life is truly heartbreaking, and it is truly devastating. And it 100% will have shaped how Dele grew up. Now, obviously, Dele was then adopted by seemingly a lovely family. He says it himself. They couldn't have been any better for him. They were great, still are great, and you know, by all accounts, amazing human beings, and that's fantastic. But that doesn't mean that all of a sudden those past 10 years that he went through as a child growing up, the most important years of your life as a child, that doesn't mean that they were forgotten all of a sudden because he'd been adopted now by a family that were much better than what his previous one was, and that were going to look after him. He would have still been living with those traumas. He would have still been living with those demons. And to think that for the opening 10 years of Dele's life, he had everything that went on that he explained yesterday. He then was adopted and probably had 4 years of stability, of sort of what we would call a normal life. And I know I don't want to sound too too sort of obnoxious here, because I know that those things go on in people's lives, and I know Dele won't be alone. He wasn't the only person to have gone through something like this, so I don't want to sit there and say a normal life, but 4 years of stability for him with his new family, and 4 years of what many of us would deem as the standard, even though it isn't. It's a luxury, but many of us would deem as the standard. And then by 16 years old, he's thrusted into MK Dons' first team, and a couple of years later, he's got the world at his feet. He's got everything in his hands. He's got all the money he could want. He's got the cars he could want to drive. He's got all of the people around him that, all of the women that he might want around him. He's got all of the houses that he could potentially buy. He's got everything. He's got everything in the palm of his hands. And Dele's gone from having all of that trauma as a child, no stability, having a key to his house at 7 years old, dealing drugs at 8 years old, abused as a child, all of a sudden, other than a 4-year spell in between where it was a little bit of normality, or what we would deem as normality, he's then the complete opposite end of the scale, and he's thrust into being a professional footballer with the world at his hands, with everything he could possibly want, and anything he didn't have, he could go and get within, minutes. That must have been hard for him. It must have been hard to deal with. It must have been hard to cope with. And no child should ever go through life without guidance. No child. Children cannot go through life without guidance. They do not know the walk of life to not be guided through it. They cannot do that. And Dele is an example of somebody that, because his mother had her issues and her demons, and his father was not present, he had to go through those earlier years of his life without guidance. So he got himself mixed up in selling drugs, in smoking cigarettes, in being out till all hours, in mixing with the wrong people, because he had no parent. And I think this is a really important point to make. It's different. There's one thing being a mum. Anyone can be a mum. Anyone can give birth. Any woman or man in this day and age, or whatever you want to be, anybody can give birth to a child. Anybody can be a mum. Anybody can be a dad. Any two people can have a sexual intercourse and birth a child. Anybody. Or certainly, I know there's medical reasons some people might not be able to do, but, generally speaking, the majority of human beings can do that. It takes much more to be a parent. A parent is about guiding the child. A parent is about loving, caring for the child, doing everything in that child's best interest, putting them first, making them the number one priority, making them the reason you do everything, ensuring their safety. When you grow up in this world, as you are growing up, you look to your parents, your mum and dad, as that safety blanket, or whoever it might be that is raising you. Might be a grandma, granddad, brother, sister. For whatever reason, you look to them and they almost become your parents. Even if they are not biologically your mother or father, they become your parents. I know loads of lads and girls that were raised by their grandma and granddad, and the grandma and granddad then become the parents, or by their brother, who then becomes the parent. Because they're the figure that they look to for guidance. They're the figure that they look to for safety, for love, for comfort, for everything that a child needs in order to grow as a human being. And Dele did not have that. He had a mum, but he didn't have a parent. He didn't have guidance. He didn't have that love. He didn't have that emotion. And I'm not going to sit here and have a go at his mum and his dad, whatever, because I don't know the full story. And Dele himself speaks about going to, a rehab centre in America for a number of weeks, and only just coming out very recently. And they told him to, sort of not blame himself, but he also learned in there that it wasn't his mum's fault, and his mum was fighting her own demons, etc., etc. I'm not going to sit here and have a go at Dele's mum or his situation, because I don't know anything about it. But what I do know is that lad had no guidance when he was growing up. In the most important years of his life, he had no guidance, he had no love, he had no emotion, he had nobody that was there looking out for him as a child. And the only time he did have that, all of that, was when he was adopted at age 12. And then he got a taste of it for a couple of years while still living with those traumas of the past, and being a 12-year-old child, going through everything that comes with that, puberty and growing up and hormones and all of that sort of stuff that goes with being a teenage child. And then after 4 years of having to deal with that, bit more stability, dealing with the trauma, all of a sudden, first team professional footballer, not so long later, moving to a Premier League club, making a breakthrough on the Premier League scene as one of the most talented players this country has ever produced. It's as simple as that. Whatever happens with Dele in his future, nobody can deny that when he broke through onto the scene, he was one of naturally the most talented footballers this country has ever produced. And this interview is important because it gives us context. And context is always important in football. And what you often find in football is you get a lot of news reporters and journalists and media outlets, and even, people like me on fan channels, etc., who give their opinion and give their thoughts and give their feelings on a situation without the real content. Without the real context. Before this interview, it appeared that Dele had just fallen out of love with football. He wasn't that arsed about it. He was happy to take the money, and he was just somebody that didn't care anymore. And that led to people saying he's his own biggest enemy. He's not bothered. He's a waste of money, etc., etc. But that was because nobody knew the context of it. And I do think that there has to be a point where, I'm seeing a lot of people dragging up old interviews from the media, or talking about, him not wanting to play, or him not having the desire or the passion, and he's done it to himself, etc., etc. Again, that was before anybody knew what was going on. So if you were to ask anybody about Dele 6 months ago, 12 months ago, I do think there'd have been a very very little percentage that would have said, well, hang on, we don't know what's going on there. A lot of them would have said, well, he's not asked anymore, he's only asked about the money, because that's the world we live in. Everybody's got an opinion, and that is the world of football. We sometimes think as fans that if this person isn't performing, that they've got no excuse for that, because they're being paid hundreds of thousands of pounds a year, so there's no excuse. So if they're not performing, it's down to them, it's their fault, and they're a disgrace. When really, situations like this are happening, and Dele won't be the only case of this. Situations like this are happening throughout football constantly, but we just don't know the context to it. We now know the context to it, and it makes more sense as to why the last couple of years of Dele's career have been a little bit, obviously not as bright as what his start was when he broke through. The way he come across in the Tottenham documentary, it seemed like there was something wrong. People just put it down to lazy, can't be arsed, he's just happy to take the money. But it wasn't. He was fighting them demons. He was fighting that trauma. He was fighting that emotion. He was dealing with mental health. And this is why mental health is so huge. As somebody that has suffered from mental health all of my life, from the early ages of my life, I remember doing things and having to do things that other kids didn't need to do. And I was always questioning, why do I have to check the door 150 times before I go to bed, but Louis down the road doesn't? Why do I have to make sure that my mobile phone is on top of 4 jackets before I put it on the grass, but Connor, who I play footy with, can just throw his on the grass? Why do I have to do all of this constantly? From young age up to now, I still suffer, and it's so important because without context and without speaking and without coming out and saying, listen, I'm struggling and this is what's going on, people don't even, it's not even a sort of a thought most times, is it? You know, when all of those media sources were talking about Dele, and when all of, you know, when all of the journalists or the pundits or the papers were talking about what's happened to Dele, did any of them report, well, he might be struggling mentally, he might have had something go on in his life? No, that wasn't even a thought. Now, if Dele had a broken leg or a broken, I don't know, let's say a broken arm, and he hadn't played for a year, then everybody would be saying, well, he's not playing because he's had the broken arm. Or if he had let's say he done an ACL injury and then he come back and then he was a little bit not himself, you'd go, well, he's just had that ACL injury, to be fair. But you never hear, well, he might be having something going on. He might he might have a mental health injury. He might be struggling with his mental health. You don't hear that until the person, in this case Dele, sits down and explains it. And now it makes much more sense, the context behind what has happened to his career. I suppose the biggest take from this interview for me is it's a positive. This is a good thing. Because A, he's coming out and talking, which is so important. And it is so important. It's the most important thing that, and it's the hardest thing, but it's the most important thing you can do, is get help. The hardest thing when you are struggling mentally is to ask for help. Trust me, I've been there. I've been there hundreds of times. The hardest thing is to ask for help. But it is the most important thing, because the moment you ask for help, the moment you can get better, and people around you can help you get better. But it's also a brilliant interview because you can very clearly see that Dele is now comfortable speaking about these things and is in a much better place. You can tell he's in a much better place, not only because he says he is, but you can just tell by his demeanour and the way he's talking that those weeks in the rehab centre and everything that he's learned, or everything he's heard and all the people that he's met and spoken to, you can tell how positive of an effect that they have had on him, and that has had on him. And listen, Dele may never be what he once was. I know he says in the interview with Gary Neville. And by the way, I just want to give a big shout out to Gary Neville, because I think Gary Neville conducted this interview brilliantly. I think it was a brilliant interview. I think the questions were brilliant. I think the emotion that Gary Neville showed was heartfelt as well. And I think the way he acted when Dele was very clearly struggling to tell this story was very, very, very comforting. So a big shout out to Gary Neville. But listen, I know Dele says, I don't want to get back to where I was, I want to be better. That might not be possible. It mightn't be possible, because he may have that hunger back. And I hope it is possible, by the way, because he's an Everton player. And if Dele can even get to 60% of what he was at the height of his career for Everton, then he'll be brilliant for us, because he genuinely was world class at the height of his career. So if he can get to even half of that back, then he'll be important for this Everton team. But he might not be able to. He might not be able to. He might have all the willing in the world. He might have all the, the desire and that warm heart sort of fire feeling in his belly again. But that doesn't mean that physically he's going to be able to get back to that level again. It doesn't. I hope he does. I hope more than anything he does, for him and for us as well. But more importantly for him. But it doesn't mean that it will happen. But what's important is that he's getting better, and he clearly is feeling comfortable now to talk about these things, and to talk about the effects that his previous trauma had on his career, to talk about the fact that he became addicted to sleeping pills, to talk about the fact that he did used to drink and take things to sort of numb the pain, because it's sort of become easy to do that He speaks specifically about how in rehab they taught him that, you know, he was having all of these house parties, apparently when he was younger, when he just burst onto the scene, and he didn't care who was in his house. He wasn't bothered who was in his house. He'd have all sorts of people in his house that he didn't know, and he spoke about how in rehab he was taught that was because that was comfortable for him, because when he was growing up, his mum would have all sorts of people in the house that he didn't know. He found comfort in that. And he speaks about how he learned about that, and he started to understand a lot more of why he was doing what he was doing. And then you add being a professional footballer on hundreds of thousands of pounds a week, with everybody around you giving into your every need because they just want to be around you because you've got that much money and you're famous, and all of the pressures that come with that. He talks about becoming addicted to sleeping tablets that are given out by football clubs, which I find a little bit mad, because they are a drug that can become so easily addictive. I get it. I get why footballers playing football, a lot of adrenaline, a lot of energy, a lot of, you know, a lot of adrenaline needed. And if you've got a night game and you play a really important night game, let's say a final, and you win a cup and then you come off and you've got to wake up at 8 o'clock the next day, how are you getting to sleep? You've got all that adrenaline, you've got all that desire, you know, riding in you. It's only a couple of things to do. You either take a pill to put yourself asleep, or you enjoy yourself. You go out, you try and have a bevy, you try and live the moment. So he speaks about them becoming addicted to sleeping pills, and then obviously through the football club knowing what the sleeping pills were called, and then, you know, ultimately going and getting them elsewhere, and then not even using them to sleep, just using them throughout the day to get by, because they helped him relieve himself of those feelings of his past trauma. And that is often what happens with people that suffer from mental health problems, is their body and their brain will find something that helps them cope and will attract itself to it, and will become attracted to it, and then will desire it, whether that be taking drugs, whether that be drinking alcohol, whether that be smoking, whether that be taking sleeping pills, whether that be taking, you know, smoking weed, whether that be taking cocaine, whatever it may be. If your body thinks, oh, when I do this, and your brain thinks, when I do this, I don't worry about that, and I don't think about that, so I'm going to do this more often. And then the moment you start thinking about that, the moment you take whatever you're taking, or you drink whatever you're drinking. And it's a vicious cycle, because then the more you think about the past traumas, the more you take, and the more you take, the more you'll think about, and then it's just a vicious cycle. Your body becomes dependent on whatever it is that it's telling you is helping you get through this, but actually it's not. It's having the adverse effect. It's making things worse. And it's important that this now becomes the standard. That footballers do come out and talk. And I'm not saying every footballer that's struggling should come out and do a 40-minute interview with Gary Neville about their problems, but it's important. There will be a lot of players there in professional football that will have watched that interview yesterday and gone, you know what, I think I'm going to go in and have a word with the manager tomorrow. Or I think I'm going to go in and have a word with a couple of my teammates. Or even outside of work, I might go and speak to my mum tomorrow. I might go and speak to my partner because I am struggling. Not even just footballers, people. There will have been a lot of people watching that Dele interview who will have gone, you know what, I'm going to talk. And that is so important. That's the most important thing to take from this, is that it helps other people. Because it is devastating. And it is heartbreaking. And everything that went on in his childhood is sickening. Quite frankly, it is sickening. But the important thing is now that for Dele, he continues to get better. And listen, whatever happens with Dele at Everton, ultimately, I think there is still a footballing decision to be made surrounding Dele. And the decision that Everton have got to make surrounding whether or not he stays at the football club is still there. And hopefully that hunger and that desire he talks about helps him to perform, and then hopefully, you know, he can show us what he can do, and then maybe he stays at Everton. But even Dele says in the interview himself, regardless of what happens with Everton, he'll always be grateful for the way in which they were with him during the time that he was in rehab, and how understanding they were with him for what was going on. But there is still a decision to be made there. But regardless of whether it's at Everton or not, I just wish the lad the very, very best. I just do. I hope that he finds his peace and that he finds his comfortability with that, and he goes on and has a good end of his career, whether it's here or somewhere else. Because I really can't explain to you how difficult it is to struggle, and especially when you're struggling alone. And I haven't had the trauma that Dele's had. I've had a lovely, wonderful, couldn't have asked for a better childhood, couldn't have asked for better parents, role models, etc. But there's a lot of people out there that, like Dele, will be struggling and will have had these experiences, and it's important to see a big name player, somebody that was one of the greatest talents and still is one of the greatest talents this country has ever produced, come out and explain how none of that really matters. Doesn't matter how great he was at footy, doesn't matter how unbelievable he was on the pitch, doesn't matter how much money he had, doesn't matter how much fame he had. He struggled like everybody else can struggle, and there is bigger issues. Of course there is. I spoke at the start of the video about young kids being thrusted into academies without being able to really live their life as a child, and that's a bigger issue that needs discussion at greater length. But mental health is something that is becoming more and more prominent, and rightly so, because it is as important as physical health. I know people that can't get out of bed of a morning. I've had days myself where I can't get out of bed of a morning. If you walk down the street with a broken leg, people go, oh, he's broke his leg, that must hurt, or feel a bit sorry for him, he's broke his leg. If you walk down the street with depression or anxiety or OCD or crippling AD, whatever it may be, nobody looks and thinks that. This is important, and we obviously all stand with Dele, and we're all with Dele, and we're all behind Dele, and one thing that Dele will now get ultimately is an immense amount of support by Evertonians. He'll get an unbelievable amount of support by Evertonians, because that's what we do. That's what we do as Blues. We support our own, and again, like I said, if Dele can even be 60%, 50% of the player that he was at Tottenham, and he says he's got that hunger back, he's got that desire back, so let's hope that his body can get back to a level where he can provide that. And if it can, then he'll be an excellent player for Everton. He will, and even if he doesn't even if that doesn't happen and he ends up leaving the football club, I'm pretty confident in saying he'll always have the support from Evertonians, because ultimately what he's done is extremely, extremely brave, and important as well. It is important because it's a message that if you are struggling, just talk. Again, nobody's saying go and do an interview with Gary Neville for 40 minutes that ultimately will be viewed by millions. Just talk to someone, anyone, anybody. Your mum, your dad, your brother, your best mate. There's loads of people online you can talk to that are anonymous. You'll never know who they are. You'll never see their face, but they can talk to you and they can help. It was very heartfelt, and ultimately, as I said, we are all behind Dele, and hope that Dele continues to find that peace within himself, and I hope and I feel like that interview and speaking out and getting all of that out there in the air will help him as well, because it's always good to get stuff off of your chest. It's always good to release that, and although it was hard at the time for him, I'm sure in the long run he'll feel better for having that conversation. But yeah, for Dele now, it's about getting himself fit again. It's about getting over this injury and hopefully having a couple of games in this pre-season to show Sean Dyche what he's capable of. And if he can do that, then, Everton have got 7 more games before we have to pay £10 million for him. And as I said, if Dele can get his mind right, which he says he has, and he can get his physical side right, then we could have a real talent on our hands. But there is still a decision to be made. Regardless of everything, there's still a decision to be made about Dele's Everton career. But yeah, it was really, really important, and yeah, I can't express to you how important mental health is and should be, and I just think we need to do more. And by we, I mean us as a society, us as human beings. football needs to do more, because it's all well and good saying, oh yeah, mental health's dead important, stand up and talk and this, that and the other, but there needs to be action behind it. There needs to be help for these players. There needs to be, places these players can go to talk, or places everybody can go to talk. And again, it starts, ultimately, it starts with funding and government funding and this, that and the other. I get that. And I get it's a wider societal problem, 100%. But, yeah, this was powerful. Very, very, very powerful, and quite telling as to what has gone on with Dele. And I'm not saying, by the way, that any of the stuff that was printed about him in the media before this interview is right. I'm not saying people should have slandered him. I'm not saying people should have had the go at him. But what I'm saying is, it's very important that you have context to situations. How many footballers do you see getting slagged off in the media? In the newspapers, how many footballers do you see pundits talking about in a negative manner? Because that's what football is about. Football is about people saying positive, people saying negative, people having opinions. But we do have to be aware that these people are human beings, and they're human beings with real feelings, and human beings that sometimes are suffering, and you never really know what's going on with anybody until they open up. I could sit here now and say, yeah, I'm absolutely fine, I'm sound, I'm bouncing, I'm living life, and I could get off this live stream and think, I don't want to be here anymore. And I don't, by the way. I'm not saying I do, but I'm just using that as an example. I'm just using that as an example. So, yeah, really, really powerful stuff. If you haven't checked it out, please do so. And, yeah, I just hope, again, whether he stays at Everton and is a success or doesn't, whether he, we pay the money or don't, it's all second for me. Firstly, I just hope that Dele, continues to get better and never has to sort of go through what he went through again. I just hope that now he's on a road to recovery, and that he does recover, and that everything, and he finds that peace within himself. That's first and foremost for me. That's paramount for me. Whether he stays at Everton or not, I just hope he's happy. I do. I just hope he's happy. Same with anybody that's struggling and going through stuff. And please, please, please do talk. Please. My DMs are always open. My messages are always open if you want to talk. Because, yeah, it's so important to do so. It's so important to do so. Anyway, let's get on to some transfer rumours before we finish. According to Simon Stone of the BBC, Everton have made a bid between 15 million and 20 million for Man United's Anthony Elanga. That was yesterday. Paddy Boylan reported that Everton are looking at a potential loan move for Arnold Danjuma. David Maddock of the Mirror reported that Everton have bid £25 million for Almeria forward El Bilal Toure. So if you believe the rumours, Everton have bid up to £45 million for two forward players. Fabrizio Romano reported earlier on today that AC Milan have entered the race for Danjuma. Everton and Feyenoord are also in discussions, and Danjuma has met with Sean Dyche. And then the Echo and the club reported that we are not interested in Johnny Evans. Admit reports that we are. Yeah, again, yeah, Chris Beasley's just reported, he's an Echo reporter, he's just put a picture up of the squad in Switzerland and said, nice to see Dele giving and getting a lot of love from the travelling Evertonians. Brilliant to see that. Absolutely brilliant to see. On the transfer rumours, there was a report not so long after the Anthony Elanga rumour that Everton haven't bid for Anthony Elanga, however, are interested in bringing him to the football club. Do I believe Everton have bid £25 million for El Bilal Toure? I don't know. And the reality is that Everton need forward players. Everton need attackers. Everton need goal scorers. Everton need players that ultimately are going to have a positive effect on this team next season. El Bilal Toure could be one of them, and so could Anthony Elanga. We'll wait and see what happens. Whether or not anything comes of this, I don't know. The Danjuma thing, I think, is more likely because of the past and because it's a loan deal. Can I see us spending 20 million on Elanga? If we do, it will definitely be a deal that is over about 15 years and we pay about £3.50 a year. But again, decent player, a lot of money for him, doesn't score many goals, but again, potential, quick, and certainly somebody that has impressed before, albeit has gone a bit quiet recently. And again, El Bilal Toure, seemingly there's a number of teams that are after him. Whether or not he comes to Everton in the end, we'll have to wait and see. But ultimately, again, a lot of reports at the moment, a lot of rumours at the moment, but not a lot of actually solid sort of evidence about us signing anybody, of course, after Ashley Young. But we'll wait and see. We've spoken about Toure before, and we've spoken about Alanga, so we will wait and see. But there you go. Let us know your thoughts on everything we've spoken about in the comment section down below. And please, as I've just said, if you take anything from this video, it's that if you are struggling, please drop me a message, because I'm always here to chat. We're going to leave it there. Big thanks for watching. If you have enjoyed it, please do leave a like. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new as well. Everton play in an hour, so we look forward to watching that one and seeing the squad in action. But yeah, big thanks for watching. Leave a like if you've enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're new, and we'll see you later.